Dear learners, in this session, we will understand the intricacies of the concept of welfare state and how does welfare state accommodate women's concerns. So when we talk about welfare state specifically, we need to understand the dynamics that operate between state and women. Peter Evans, sociologist who is famous for his work Embedded Autonomy, States and Industrial Transformation, notes, and this remark is very interesting, this observation, when we talk about the dynamics between women and state. He says, and I quote, "The state is both a source of the problem and part of the solution." He argues that the modern state acts as a paradox. So we find this paradox here when the problem is also coming from the state and state is providing the solution as well. It is the primary structural impediment to development when its capacity is being taken over by corruption or predation. But it remains the indispensable architect of social and economic progress when it partners effectively with society. So we see that how state possesses both the enabling space, it can create the enabling space for the growth of its citizens, as well as it can become repressive. It can also impose restrictions and it can become as an instrument of oppression. So state can provide an enabling space for the growth of its citizens. It has this potential. And it can also become repressive. It can become as an instrument of oppression. When it comes to women's status, we need to understand that there exists a complex, paradoxical, and intricate relationship with reference to women's engagement with the state, with reference to the way state is shaping up the public discourse, or we can say that the discourse on women's issues is being shaped up and state has a role to play in it. So with reference to women's status in the society, one finds that the dynamics between women and state are defined by a complex paradox. So the state acts both as the protector, as the provider, the sustainer. We have this concept of the benevolent state through the welfare mechanism, through the legal measures, legislative policies, and also as an agent of perpetuating systemic inequalities and oppression through the subtle impact of its policies and the way policies are operated. So how the policies are made and how the policies actually function and have an impact on the society. And also the way state engages with the society. When we say women and state, we also need to understand that women, wherever we are referring women as a group, so there does exist some commonalities among them. So there can be some common forms of oppression. There can be the systemic inequalities which all women go through. They face the different forms of discrimination. So there might be some commonalities, but there does exist differences as well on the basis of different other parameters of identities and how those parameters of identities intersect, especially in this particular group which we refer as women. So women are not this term, it is not a monolith, rather it is a heterogeneous group, because when we talk about them, we need to understand which specific group or identity are we talking about. So the parameters like caste, region, religion, ethnicity, it all, ability, disability, age also becomes a very important parameter. Are we talking about an elderly woman, or are we discussing about the young women as a group? So we need to be considerate of these factors as well. One needs to understand the historical, social and political context to explore the state actions, to understand, to examine those actions which state has taken to enhance equality and freedom in the society. So in what particular context state is operating, this also becomes very important to understand. State has its lawmaking and law enforcement agencies, institutions and processes, where the explicit objective is to provide justice to all. However, the operating procedures of these institutions, so through the way the operating procedures deal with the people, we find that there is this possibility of everyday acts of violence being committed against people. So when we get to see those news reports where the law enforcement agencies, people suffer, people have to go through a lot through these law enforcement agencies, it tells us that how the institutions, the processes, can become complex, because the identities intersect and marginalization becomes more complex and more difficult to challenge and to identify also. Historically, the welfare state has been the combined outcome of a variety of factors. So we find that there are a number of factors intersect with each other when we specifically talk about welfare state, which the Constitution of India also talks about. Clausewitz, in the work Contradictions of Welfare State, because the work actually highlights the contradictions. So he explores the inherent tensions within the advanced capitalist democracies. And the central argument here is this, that the welfare state is required. How does it sustain capitalism? On the one hand, it is indispensable for the capitalism's survival, and it also to some extent dismantles it. It attempts this entire idea of welfare state. What does it do? It attempts to reconcile these two totally contrasting goals, the goals which cannot be put together, but the welfare state puts these two goals together. So the one goal here is this, that the economic growth, and with growth we also find that the accumulation of capital, accumulation of means of production with few, that is there. And on the other hand, it has the goal of maintaining social order. And then the working class, how can the consent of working class be generated? It can be adopted. So state adopts several mechanisms to manufacture consent or to gain consent. So the theorist like Antonio Gramsci has given this concept of, who has given the concept of hegemony, and then the idea of manufacturing consent, and how does this consent get manufactured. So a number of apparatus operates, and when we talk about the apparatuses, we find that there can be the repressive and the ideological apparatuses both involved in the process. So if we take the particular statement here provided in this work, Clausewitz says, and I quote, Historically, the welfare state has been the combined outcome of a variety of factors which change in composition from country to country. Social democratic reformism, Christian socialism, enlightened conservative political and economic elites, and large industrial unions were the most important forces which fought for and conceded more and more comprehensive compulsory insurance schemes, labor protection legislation, minimum wages, the expansion of health and education facilities, and state subsidized housing, as well as the recognition of unions as legitimate economic and political representatives of labor. Unquote. So we find here in this statement, we get to know that how different forms of different types of actors come together, and how and on the basis of what mechanisms welfare state sustains itself. So be it the labor protection legislation, or be it the idea of minimum wages, or the kind of the subsidized education or housing, or if we take the case of unionization of labor, establishing trade unions, so it all becomes important and act as those variety of factors, and those factors differ from country to country, are not the same in all the countries. So we might have differences as well. Coming to state and reproductive capacities of women, when we talk about this engagement between women and state, so we have these policies oriented towards the welfare of women in form of social security provisions, in form of labor protection legislation, or in form of maternity benefits. And then we do have this idea that women and their biological reproduction, their reproductive capacities are also considered important and are required for the sustenance, for not only for the sustenance of the family or community, but also for the sustenance of the nation. So when we talk about this idea, there is this very important work by Neera Yuval Davis, and in her book Gender and Nation, she has argued that biological reproduction, it is not simply a natural act, it becomes a fundamentally a political and national project. So we see that an act which is natural, but then how does it transform into a political and national project? So in her work, she argues that by giving birth to new members, because there does exist this idea that people are considered as power, and people's presence is required for any nation to survive, to actually strengthen itself, and depending upon, and then that also varies in different contexts depending upon the kind of the population that is there. We do have eugenics discourse which puts emphasis on the kind of the population. It is not about to either to have it or not to have it. So if there is population explosion, or there is population growth already in a country, then the state focuses on reducing the number of the people, because the resources must also be sufficient. But then there are contexts, there are societies where the birth is encouraged, where the state has this imperative to enhance its population, to focus more on population growth, and then to adopt measures to go forward in this direction. So when women give birth to new members, or so those new members are there as members of the family, but they also become the members of the collectivity. So women act as the biological producers of the nation. So it is the reproduction, and through the reproduction they become the producers of the nation and the biological producers, and serve as bearers of the collective boundaries. This collectivization is very important, and the creation of the boundaries. So the belonging depends upon this fact that where does a person take birth into, which group the person belongs to depends on the fact that where are you born into. So she argues that as biological producers of children or people, women are also therefore bearers of the collective within these boundaries, and the boundaries exist between us and they. So this us and they becomes really important because it operates across nations. It is not only about our nation and their nation, so us and they in terms of the national boundaries, but it also becomes operative in terms of religions, communities, and families as well. Women are also considered as the symbolic bearers of the identity of family, community, and nation. So they are the honor of the family. They are seen, their identity is seen as tied to the identity of the family and honor of the family. So they are the keepers, they are the bearers of the honor of the family and then community and nation as well. When we talk about this us and they and how the boundaries are the collective boundaries are created and how are women placed and situated in those boundaries, this very interesting and very important example of abducted women, because during partition, we know partition of India, which had happened in 1947, it was women who bore the brunt of partition and who had gone through the unprecedented, unparalleled amount of violence, forms of violence, patterns of violence were unprecedented. And so they were, raped, sexually assaulted, and then what had happened, it was abduction and forcible conversion also that had taken place on both the sides of the border. So during this period, during the partition and the independence of India, because independence had partition attached to it, and the unfortunate incident, so large number of women on both sides of border were abducted. Now, to facilitate their repatriation and recovery, this particular law got passed, and the name of the act was the Abducted Persons Recovery and Restoration Act. As a result of this act, and why was this act passed? Because the objective was to bring back those women who got abducted and who were there on the other side of the border. However, the state mandated recovery process was full of difficulties, often forcibly uprooting women from their newly formed connections, newly formed families. Children were also there in some cases. We have this very interesting work, Borders and Boundaries, by Ritu Menon and Kamla Bhasin, who have gone through those oral narratives and who examined the experiences of women during the 1947, this incident, the partition, after partition. So what had women gone through? The objective was to know this, to unearth this idea, which revealed how the state-driven recovery efforts enhanced the vulnerabilities of women, because there were women who did not want to go back, who had this idea that they will not be accepted, and this had happened with a number of women who had to remain in the camps because their families, this stigma was attached, stigma of being polluted, and their families were not ready to accept them back. So we see that how does state, in what ways state intervenes and engages with women and the different aspects of their lived realities and their identities. When it comes to the reproductive capacities of women, state to some extent has a role in governing the reproductive choice. The reproductive policies of the state, because these policies, if we take the case of maternity benefits, or if we talk about PCPNDT Act, we find that some of these laws deal with the area of reproduction, surrogacy, for example. So the reproductive policies of the state encompass laws, welfare schemes, and demographic targets that dictate how a government regulates and manages population growth. And how will it deal with the area of reproductive rights, or how will it manage maternal health care issues? So we do, when it comes to the specific policies that we had, so Indian state, it had the policy and it tried to tackle the issue of maternal mortality, infant mortality, or we have this major issue of sex selective abortions. All these take us into the sphere of reproduction, biological reproduction, and then we have the specific legislations such as Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act or Preconception Prenatal Diagnostic Techniques Act, which in turn influences citizens' family planning decisions, or the kind of the medical care they will have access to, and then obviously their fundamental right, because reproductive right is considered as one of the fundamental rights. So this was the background, and now we need to understand welfare state. What is welfare state? So welfare state is a liberal democratic state which plays an important role in the protection and promotion of people's well-being, especially their economic and social well-being. Based on the principles of equality of opportunity, equal distribution of resources, and then accountability, this public responsibility for especially for the marginalized sections of people, sections of society. So the welfare state, it is important to note that it not only undertakes the task of welfare in the form of minimum wages, elimination or removal of insecurities, by supplying or by providing the social contingencies, but it also needs to provide the democratic institutional framework and political and civil liberties. So this becomes very important because the welfare state has a number of tasks attached with it. It is the kind of the positive state or the liberal democratic state which is there and which is considered as one of the important concepts enshrined in the Constitution of India under Part 4 of the Constitution, dealing with the directive principles of state policy. Directive principles, we need to understand that these are non-justiciable the ideas, the whatever rights are being provided here in this segment cannot be enforced in the court of law unless we have that the state's action and the state's legislative measures in the field. But these directions, these principles are fundamental, are very important in the governance of the country, because they provide the guidance, they provide the basic framework for the governance, and they are also considered as compatible and complementary to the fundamental rights. So when it comes to the fundamental rights and directive principles of state policy, they work in coordination with each other. They do not stand against each other. Fundamental rights secure individual civil liberties. So the idea is here provides protection to people to give them civil political liberties, whereas directive principles of state policy, it focuses more on state because it guides state to incorporate the social and economic justice principles into the policy framework. Directive principles of state policy put this duty on the government, on the state governments and on central government to apply these principles in lawmaking process. So we have a number of schemes here. I have taken only a few names, but there are a number of such policies, programs, schemes where the state has tried to fulfill the welfare goals, and some of these are as follows. Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, then we have National Rural Livelihood Mission NRLM, and then we also have State Rural Livelihood Mission. So say for example, we have this particular scheme being implemented in Uttar Pradesh as well. We do have Poshan Abhiyan or Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which specifically deals with elderly people, and many such initiatives targeting different segments of the population, because the aim here is to fulfill the constitutional promise through the welfare policies. Thank you. I hope you were able to understand the theoretical, the conceptual understanding on welfare state and the dynamics between women and state, the different aspects of this engagement between women and state. Thank you.